A 19-year-old former gas station attendant was charged with the murder of a high school girl who authorities said was abducted at random. It would appear as though she was the target of opportunity, said Lee S. Trumbull, the Morris County prosecutor. He came upon her and an abduction took place. It was an especially vicious crime because of many stab wounds. The suspect, Michael J. Manfredoni, was arrested by police during a stakeout at his home in Chester Township. Authorities had been looking for him since the body of the victim, 14-year-old Rachel Domas, was found. Long Valley, New Jersey. It's a town and community where everyone knows everyone, or knows of everyone. It's the kind of area where no one locks their doors. I know this all too well because I have had many of discussions with my mother about leaving doors unlocked. When the thought of violent crimes such as murder is mentioned, people will tell you that that doesn't happen in Long Valley. Not this quiet town. Not in one of the safest communities in the nation. Or does it? As someone who grew up in Long Valley, I can attest to this, that everyone knows everyone. And it is a very safe community to live in. And the idea of violent crime wasn't a thought that crossed anyone's minds. It still isn't. But Long Valley is also good at hiding scars and secrets of its past. Although it doesn't happen often, it has happened. And even as one of the safest communities in the nation. Welcome to the Campfire. Grab your s'mores and grab a seat around the fire. I am your host, Kevin. This is the Campfire Crime Chronicles, a true crime podcast. Thanks for joining me tonight around the campfire as we get into the case of Rachel Domas. So what you heard in the beginning of the intro was an excerpt of the headline of one of the news articles that I used to research for this case. Rachel Domas, 14 years old, was a freshman at Westmore's Central High School. Rachel was in the Gifted and Talented program. Rachel was also involved in the orchestra playing the cello. Fellow classmates would describe Rachel as being a good person who was the nicest, well-behaved high schooler around. According to the principal at the time, school had started on September 4th, and Rachel expressed a heavy interest in music. After school, Rachel would be running late to make her bus for the trip home. After missing the bus, Rachel would begin walking about 3 to 3.5 miles from high school to her house. At about 5 p.m., a neighbor of Rachel saw her walking toward her home and was about 3/4 of a mile from her house. Growing up, I walked to and from school a couple of times whenever I missed the bus and I didn't have any other means of transportation to the school. I know other kids who have also walked to and from school whenever I was going to school. It wasn't out of the norm back then. I think it happened more frequently then than it does now. So now getting back into the case and picking up where we left off. When Rachel didn't return home, Michael Domas would begin searching for his daughter before reporting her missing to police at 10 p.m. that night. During their investigation, police would learn that Rachel was walking home from missing the bus and that a neighbor had seen her walking home around 5 p.m. So during the investigation, police and detectives began speaking to employees of the gas station near Rachel's home. While questioning the employees at the Getty gas station about the missing girl, workers at the gas station would say that they saw a green Volvo off the side of the road and that it belonged to a former employee of the gas station, Michael Manfredonia. The year prior, while Manfredonia was employed at the Getty gas station, he would see Rachel walking to school when she was attending the middle school and would sometimes say hello to Rachel. Manfredonia was fired from the Getty gas station for stealing a radar detector out of a tow truck belonging to the gas station. Investigators would track down the owner of the green Volvo, which did belong to Michael Manfredonia, and he would be brought in for questioning that Thursday night. During this time, Detective Miko, a rookie detective at the time, would receive a phone number of a veteran psychic. But while having doubts about this psychic, he would disregard the number and not call her. Miko and his partner would go on to question Manfredonia, which he would state that his car had broke down and that he was walking around the area for a while, then returning to his car where it would start up and he would continue home. The detectives, however, would feel like there would be something off about Manfredonia's story. As the night would progress, Miko was receiving heat from his supervisor to either charge Manfredonia or let him go. So at around 3 a.m., despite Miko's gut feelings and better judgment, him and his partner would drive Manfredonia home. Then after dropping him off at his house, they would search the Fairview Avenue area. Later that morning, which at this time would be Friday, Long Valley would have chatter going on. First, Detective Miko decides to give the psychic a call. The veteran psychic would be Nancy Weber, and she would tell Miko what she had seen in her visions. She would tell the detective that she had smells of automotive oil and gasoline in her visions, and that the boy's name was Michael. Mika was taken from this by Nancy knowing the name of the boy that they had interviewed the night before and that he used to work at the Getty's gas station, which Nancy wouldn't have known any of this information prior to talking to Miko. So, during that same morning, which just happened to be Friday the 13th, the hallways of Westmore Central High School were filled with chatter as well. Teachers would try to keep the kids focused, but everyone had Rachel Domas on their minds. Everyone was in disbelief in that a murder could have happened. Surely not in the quiet town of Long Valley. Everyone would be making comments and jokes about Jason Voorhees or that she was taken by the hooker man. So, who is the hooker man? Over generations, he would receive a couple of names, but the story thus stayed the same. It would be rumored that when the railroad tracks would be going through Washington and Chester townships before they made it into rail trails, that a man on or near the tracks was struck by the train having his arm ripped off. The conductor stopped, but nobody was found. Ever since then, it can be seen that a glow of a lantern swinging as if someone is walking with it to see their way. I once was in this area where it was said to have happened. I saw this light or this glow that I had no explanation for, and as I would get closer to the light, it would vanish. At the time, I had blown it off that it was nothing, but also had half of a thought that was the old tale true? By Friday afternoon, about 100 investigators from the prosecutor's office, sheriff's department, as well as the town's police and fire departments would be searching for Rachel. There would also be helicopters that would be brought in for the search. On Saturday morning, Rachel's purse would be located and then one of her shoes. Then Rachel's body would be located around 11 a.m. Saturday morning. Rachel was partially buried in a ditch about 60 yards from Fairmount Avenue. An autopsy would find that Rachel was sexually assaulted and stabbed 25 times with a knife. Saturday afternoon, both detectives, Miko and his partner, would go to Manfredonia's place of residence, as he was staying with his parents. But Michael wasn't home. The search for Manfredonia was on. Miko reached out to the psychic, Nancy Weber, for assistance. She told Miko to bring something that he had previously touched when they met, in an attempt to help locate him. When Detective Miko and Nancy had met in a parking lot, Miko brought a metal wire from Manfredonia's car. She instantly had a vision of him being suicidal and overdosing on something, but wasn't sure exactly of what. She said that he was on the other side of the mountain from where the murder took place, and that she saw two 55-gallon of drums nearby. She would also tell Miko that she sees Michael being groggy, delirious, and delusional, as well as taking something to OD on. She would also tell Miko that he is watching the house and sees a patrol car sitting outside of the house, which Miko knew to be true because there was an officer stationed at his house in case he had returned. Nancy would begin drawing roughly the location of the drums and the hill in relation to the home. And then she stops. She tells Miko, "You're going to catch him soon." While Nancy is telling him this, Miko's radio, which has been silent all night, receives a call telling him that Manfredonia was in the house at that time. Miko basically kicks Nancy out of the car in a nice manner, thanking her, and drives towards the home. As soon as Miko arrives on scene, Manfredonia is being placed in an ambulance. Detective Miko jumps in the ambulance with him and reads Manfredonia his rights while accompanying him to the hospital. According to a statement that Manfredonia made later, Rachel had walked by while he was working on his car. They knew each other informally. The year previous, she passed the Getty gas station on her way to the nearby middle school, as we mentioned earlier. And Michael would sometimes say hello. Since Rachel was already familiar with him, perhaps she was less on guard that day. According to Michael, when he saw her, he asked her out, and she rebuffed him, ridiculing him about his looks and attire. Manfredonia's account of what happened was then he grabbed the knife from his car and said to Rachel, "I don't like being made fun of. I'll kill myself." Manfredonia then claims that Rachel responded back to him that "you're acting like a little kid. I don't care what you do." End quote. Manfredonia then recounts pushing Rachel down, but denies any recollection of stabbing her 25 times. Now, with the number of stabs that was accounted for, several reports said that it was 25 times, others says it was 26 times. Take that as you will, in case some of you armchair detectives out there find a report and it says 26 times. I don't need an email later saying it was 26 and not 25. It just depends on the report that you see. So Manfredonia had a lazy right eye, and it stared outward the same as iguanas might. He had dark hair, a mustache, and he was deemed mentally retarded with an IQ of 78. Up to this point, Manfredonia had no serious prior convictions except for a minor charge for robbery of the radar detector. So that Monday, when students and teachers would return to the high school, no teachers or guidance counselors talked with the students about the murder that took place. On September 12th, 1985, after waiving his right to a jury trial, Michael was tried by a judge and he would be found guilty of the murder, felony murder, aggravated sexual assault, kidnapping, and possession of a weapon for unlawful purpose. While on trial, the death penalty would be brought up as an option for a sentence as it was reinstated in New Jersey in 1982. It would be said during this portion of the trial, when the death penalty was brought up, that Manfredonia allegedly suffers from intermittent explosive disorder. It's hard to say if there was any proof to support this argument, and it wasn't mentioned any time prior to the death penalty being brought up during the trial. On August 8th, 1986, Manfredonia would be sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 55 years. On September 26, 2002, Manfredonia would have served 17 years of his 55-year sentence before being eligible for parole. Manfredonia made claims with filing court papers that during his trial he was provided with ineffective defense. His lawyer, Elizabeth Smith, states that his original defense failed to use a defense of diminished capacity upon with his emotional instability and borderline retardation. Smith would go on to also claim that his attorneys at the time didn't call for an expert witness who would have testified that there was no way of telling for sure if Domas had been sexually assaulted, which state law states that such an appeal must be filed no later than 5 years after sentencing. In the papers, Manfredonia claims his attorney told him that he could not file an effectual representation appeal until after his other appeals had been filed. The Morris County Assistant Prosecutor, Joseph D. Onfrio, would state that he sees no reason for Harper to grant the motion. He stated that Manfredonia originally filed his motion in 1999, but that it's just getting scheduled now. Alright, guys, that concludes this tale of the Campfire. Let me know on social media your guys' thoughts and opinions about psychics. I have a little bit of skepticism with them, but I also feel that there are people out there that are truly have some sort of psychic abilities. But for the most part, the ones that you see advertised on the side of the road, I believe most of them, the majority, 99.9% of them, are fakes that just collect money. I do believe there are a few out there, and they're the ones that you don't normally hear about. The ones that aren't always advertising or have big billboard signs up saying anything about palm readings or any of that sorts. I believe there are a few people out there that do have some sort of abilities. But as I've mentioned, I believe there's a lot of fake psychics out there also. If you remember in the beginning of the episode, I had mentioned that Long Valley is good about hiding scars and secrets of its past. I read a blog about someone who had went to school the same time that the murder happened, and he said when he went back to school, nobody talked about the murder or Rachel Domas after that, and that it was almost like they had forgotten that it even happened. Now, fast forward to my time. I didn't even know about this murder until somebody had mentioned it to me when I was volunteering on the fire department and first aid squads, and I was talking to one of the officers who was an officer at the time that it had happened, and he assisted in the investigation. Then there was a TV documentary that came out in 2006 about it that I watched prior to moving from New Jersey to West Virginia. But even after that documentary aired, still a lot of people did not know about the murder that had happened and did not even know that it had occurred. Also, Rachel Domas was not the only homicide that happened in Long Valley. There was at least 2 other homicides that had happened in years past prior to Rachel Domas. Those will be in a bonus episode. There's not a lot of information on either of those cases, so I'm going to combine the 2 of them into a bonus episode that you can find over at the bonfire. So with that, all resources used to gather the information for the case include but not limited to news articles, reports, documentaries, as well as other sources. I appreciate everyone who has gathered by the campfire with me for this case this evening. Also, if you'd like to listen to ad-free shows as well as bonus episodes and get a shout out on the podcast during the most recent episodes, sign up and join me over at the bonfire at Patreon. You can find the bonfire over at Patreon at patreon.com/Campfire Crime Chronicles. You can choose from a couple of different tiers, and as we grow the podcast, more tiers will be added later. Also, if you would like to contribute to the S'mores Fund, you can do so on my website at campfirecrimechronicles.com. Also, the best way to support the show is by word of mouth. Tell your friends and family to tune in for the podcast anywhere they get their podcasts and listen to the show. And if you like it, give us a 5-star rating. So join me next time in 2 weeks as we gather around the campfire for the next grisly tale. And remember, lock your doors and sleep with one eye open. This is the Campfire Crime Chronicles, a true crime podcast.